Napoli, Napoli, Napoli!
What is going on, my fellow Napoletani and calcio enthusiasts? Today, we have a very special guest by the name of Kendrick. If you're not familiar with him, he commentates on a lot of Serie A and UEFA games. Patrick, if you just want to say what's up to our chat. I know we just started live, but they'll get in here shortly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on. It's delightful.
Of course. Thanks for coming
Patrick.
on.
It's an honor.
All right, so we got Michele in the chat already, so let's just get to the questions. So Patrick, we'll start with you. If you can give us just a little intro of yourself, how you came up to be a commentator, and yeah, just whatever you want to talk about.
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in England, and it was always a dream of mine to become a commentator, but it's quite difficult to figure out how best to do so. So I had a few near misses. I studied languages at university. I thought it was never going to happen, really, but eventually I got made a bit of a breakthrough when I was doing my master's to become an interpreter. I started doing games for local hospital radio in the west of England for Bristol City, a team that was in the championship, second tier of English football. So I started volunteering, and then from there I started doing some audio descriptions, so quite similar to radio commentary for QPR. Then they're in the Premier League, Queen's Park Rangers. And I actually started doing some commentary in French and Italian as my first big break. That was my first paid work. But I always say the irony was I was commentating a lot on games in Italian in London, and actually had to move to Italy to be able to commentate in English, which is a little bit counterintuitive. But yeah, that's the sort of abridged version of how I got here. And I've been commentating on Serie A now since 2013 on off, so 12 years.
So just a side question on that. How many languages do you speak fluently?
I speak 4, so English, Italian, French, and Portuguese. Yeah, but my Portuguese is a little bit weaker than the other ones. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I heard you talking on the Napoli radio, and your Italian is phenomenal. I just want to let that out there. I was like, wow, is that Patrick Kendrick talking? I was like, wow.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
He's
very kind.
Hey Mario, he's got some Napolitano in there too. He's got
I know, I heard it.
He's got one phrase that went viral. What was that, Patrick?
I'm a vinchut. Yeah, that was a good day. Yeah, the next 24 to 48 hours was crazy. I don't have Instagram, but my wife was showing me her phone, and yeah, it was crazy, the reaction to that. And then this summer when I went down to Naples, a lot of friends and friends of friends on the beach and stuff, and we're like, oh, we heard you commentate there, go and say it, and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's been a nice response to all of that. But again, you know, we can only do this because of the raw material we're given. Scott McTominay doesn't score that goal and Lukaku doesn't score the goal, then we never had that moment, and Napoli weren't champions for the 4th time. So yeah, without Conte and all of those guys, you don't get those sort of commentary moments.
Well, it sounds like fate to me, and I'm glad that you were the one commentating because it was perfect. So in terms of your fondest memory as a calcio fan, go ahead and let the crowd know what that is.
Wow. It's hard to know really as a fan, because it's often the same story for us guys growing up in England in the 90s. We had this program called Gazzetta Football Italia, which was on a Sunday. It was the only free-to-air soccer you could watch back home. So, you know, that was a golden age of Italian football. So I used to enjoy watching those matches in the 90s. You know, we got to watch people like Ronaldo at Inter. You know, we saw Roberto Baggio, players really in their prime. But I would say latterly, in terms of the moments we've had since I've been commentating on Serie A, for me, it was Kvaratskhelia, really. It was that first season when he came in and Napoli won the Scudetto, and I don't think anyone expected them to do it. I know they went relatively close with Spalletti in his first season, but that partnership with Victor Osimhen and him scoring that header on his debut against Verona, and I felt like I was trying to speak on behalf of everyone, not only Napoli fans, but the Italian football community as a whole with this guy. I'd done a couple of his games for Georgia, because I've been commentating on the world feed for Georgia. I think it was European qualifiers or Nations League games. So I'd seen him once or twice. I managed to get the pronunciation more or less right. But I remember he scored against Monza. I think it must have been the first home game of the season. I think it was a 4-0 win. And he scored this goal. And I just said, where on earth has he come from? And it was that, really. It was him almost on a weekly basis giving us moments that were pretty unforgettable. And I can only imagine what that's like as a Napoli fan. I have some inkling to it because of friends and family. I spend a lot of time in Naples due to my personal life. But as a neutral and as someone who was privileged enough to really describe the league and talk people through that season, I think that would be the standout memory for me. It was Kvaratskhelia. And it was him in that season in general. But I think the moments in particular were the goal against Atalanta, the goal away against Sassuolo, and of course the performance in the 5-1 win against Juventus, which I know will always be to you guys.
Yeah, we were there for that 5-1. It's unforgettable. I definitely miss Osimhen and Cavada being in our lineup. They were a huge impact to our team. I can only imagine what Conte would have been able to work with them here. But now we got Lukaku and Luka, and all sides are different.
And Højlund.
And Højlund now too. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But
absolutely.
So can you tell us, in terms of being a live commentator, like how is the life, traveling, expenses, just anything of like that nature? How do you deal life as a commentator?
Yeah, it's busy because, as soon as you're booked for a game, then you know that you have to do a lot of preparation to make sure that you're ready for it. So that's the difficulty with it, is putting so much time and preparation and hours of study into one game. And then as soon as the game starts, you don't know how much of that preparation you're going to be able to use. And above all, once the game is over, you basically have to bin it. I know some colleagues who keep their notes and, they like to refer back to them. I'm very much a case of, okay, that game's done now, and I'm going to start the next one from scratch. So the travel, it depends on the periods of the season. But it's quite a demanding job in terms of a lot of late nights as well. Typically the biggest games over here are 8:45 kickoff. So by the time you're finished, it's nearly 11 o'clock, and then you're getting home quite late. So it's trying to stay lucid as well, especially after you're driving home after a game. But in general, whenever I'm starting to feel a little bit fatigued or I'm starting to feel a little bit drained, then I always try and say to myself, come on, you're watching and commentating on football for a living. You're not going down a mine, with the greatest of respect to people who do that. I feel very fortunate to do the job I do, and I try and put it into relative terms.
Well, we're
one
fortunate
thing
that
I've
you're
always
100%,
wondered.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you.
Hey, Patrick, one thing I've always wondered about the live commentating is like people get sick. Like
Yes.
when you're under the weather with a fever. I don't know if I've ever noticed on any sports event, any game, any match, whatever, where somebody that was supposed to be the live commentator didn't show up because they were sick. How do you deal with that when you're under the weather?
It's tricky. Sometimes you can't do it, and we have a senior producer who's very demanding on that, and he always says it's not fair on the audience. If your voice is changed in any way, if you're not able to give 100%, if it's coming across in the broadcast, then you need to be mature enough to put your hand up and say, I can't do the game, which is difficult because all of us at Serie A, we're freelancers. If we don't work that day, we don't get paid. So it's trying to strike the right balance. But it has happened. I've had to step in for colleagues. It happened a fair bit during the pandemic. There's a very famous example with the Rai commentator Alberto Rimedio, who missed the Euro 2020 final against England because it was he caught COVID, him and his co-commentator, and then they had to change it. So you can imagine that, Italy win the Euro, they beat England at Wembley, and the commentator can't do it because he's got COVID. So it does happen. Especially when you're working with your voice, and especially working in confined spaces with a co-commentator. If I've got a sniffle, maybe I can pass it on to Manuel Pascali or whoever I'm working with. So you need to be careful, and obviously there are certain times of the year, but typically, touch wood, whether it's a hot tea with some honey or lemon, you find a way to get it done. To be honest, in match day 2, there are a couple of games, Lecce Milan on the Friday and Genoa Juventus on the Sunday, where I felt a little bit under the weather, and I was concerned it came across, but I was assured that it didn't come through in my voice, even though I didn't feel 100%. But that's what I'd call one of those borderline things. And you also need to weigh up how late in the day it is if you're going to wave the white flag, and whether you've got adequate cover. So again, it's a case of trying to figure out what's the best for the product. That's what we always try and keep in mind.
Okay, makes sense. So thank you, Patrick, for telling us a little bit of your life as a commentator and just some personal interest into the calcio world. We'll do a little side question here from Michele. Mr. Kendrick, we all know you have a soft spot for Spalletti, but have you fully bought into Conte's Napoli yet?
I have. I've definitely bought into it now. I was a little bit down on Napoli at some stages last season, which people weren't shy to tell me on social media, on X in particular. They said, "Oh, you're so critical, you're so negative about Napoli." I didn't particularly like the style of play at times. I felt like it wasn't sustainable. Ultimately, I was proven wrong because Napoli won the league, and ultimately, that's all you need is one more point than your nearest challengers. I do like the fact that Conte hasn't rested on his laurels. I think we can all remember what happened after Spalletti left. Apart from the 3 coach fiasco, the signings that summer were really underwhelming. But what I like now is the fact that Napoli, they always say when you're in a position of strength, that's when you need to strengthen. You need to try and actually make the gap even wider than it currently is. So I have to say, what I like about it is, besides the defensive solidity, okay, best defense in the league last season, I think best defense in Europe across the 5 major leagues. They haven't conceded yet this season. And what I really liked about that Cagliari performance is the spirit as well. I love the way that they're so unapologetic in celebrating an added time winning goal against Cagliari in a game they should win. It was so like Parma in that sense. And there's a big difference this time. The Parma one was almost, they needed to get that result because they'd lost at Verona in match day 1. There were still some question marks about the team after the 10th place finish the season before. This one, they're the reigning champions, and they should beat Cagliari. And it looks like it's going to end in a frustrating goalless draw, and then you've got to wait 2 weeks before you can play again. But then Anguissa scores, and it changes everything. But what I like is there was none of that sort of big team swagger, as if to say, well, we should win this, so, let's just walk back. No, this is what it means to the fans. This is what it means to the players. And we know that every time we score one of those goals, it's huge for our own morale, both personally as individuals and as a team, but also it's like a dagger in the hearts of the challengers. Other teams are watching that game and thinking, okay, Napoli they've dropped a couple of points at home in match day 2. No, instead, we go into match day 3 after the international break, and Napoli, Roma, Juventus, all maximum points and all haven't conceded yet.
And Patrick, talking about Conte a little bit more, by the end of the season, if you had to name one thing that you feel like Conte still needed to do a little bit better for the next season, so for like this season, something that maybe he wasn't at his best the last season, like if there was something that Conte needs to do other than obviously performing in Europe, what are some things maybe that you feel like Conte could do better this season than he didn't do last season?
I'd like to see the team create a few more chances. I'd like to see him be a bit more willing to gamble, to just lose some of that defensive control in order to create more chances and maybe let some of those flair players off the leash a bit more. I mean, we saw what Lang could do against Cagliari. I think he's going to increasingly play, but what we've learned with Conte is, and I think it will be at least a couple of games before we see Højlund from the start, he likes to have players that he can work with over the course of a summer during a pre-season. And what I was impressed with last season was his ability to adapt, when Neres got injured and then Raspadori came into the team and the changing of shape. So that was a real positive. What I'd like to see him now do is, even if it means Napoli concede more goals than last season, I always think that a team that creates more chances ultimately is going to win many more games than they lose, just by a process of you're going to keep creating chances. Sooner or later, those chances are going to go in. We saw it a little bit with Atalanta, albeit, they had their weaknesses. We've seen it with Inter in the past. I still feel there aren't enough easy wins for Napoli. You'd like to see, I remember the 4-0 win away at Cagliari last season. I remember Napoli winning 3-0 against Fiorentina, but in Florence. But beyond that, I don't remember too many big wins. And I think when you're a team that's going for the title, especially now you have Champions League football, if you're 3 goals up after an hour, you can use all 5 substitutions then, and you can say, we're not going to concede 3 goals. We've won this game, and let's give half an hour rest to these guys. Whereas sometimes with Napoli under Conte, it feels like they have to squeeze every last drop out until the 90th minute. And that's sustainable for 38 league games season. I don't know how manageable that is and how durable that is over a 55 to 60 game season.
So in terms of that, let's get into the transfer market. I'm hoping that with this new transfer market that we accomplished, I think it was pretty good in terms of having depth into our squad. Tell us your thoughts about that. Will it help Napoli in the UCL? Will Conte implement these rotations as he should?
I think he will. It's definitely going to help. You need a bigger squad. Whether he looks at it as 2 players per position. We saw a lot last season with some of the other Italian clubs that they often had an 11 they picked in Serie A and then an 11 they picked in the Champions League. And it wasn't necessarily always them picking their strongest team in the Champions League and trying to rest for some games domestically. It was often the other way around. So I think Conte is going to take a similar approach. I think he'll be picking his strongest 11 where possible every week in the league. And he'll be picking a team based on the opposition in the Champions League that allows Napoli to get those 15 to 18 points, whatever the tally is required. Because from a Napoli perspective, we don't know what this looks like. It's 8 league phase matches as opposed to 6 group games. It's no longer a case of you have to finish in the top 2. Now it's a case of you need to make sure you're not in those bottom 12 teams. You need to finish between 9th and 24th at the very least. And in an ideal world, you finish 1st to 8th. But it does mean that you've got a couple of jolly, you've got a couple of trump cards that you can play. You've got a couple of lives whereby if you lose a game, it's not the end of the world. It's no longer a disaster. But I think the best bet is to try and get a series of wins to begin with. If you can win 2 or 3 games to begin with, then suddenly you're that much further along. I don't want to see Napoli going into match day 8 against Chelsea needing a result. I don't think that's necessarily good for anyone's heart.
Thank you, Patrick. So we're going to get into some more side questions here because there's a lot flowing
Sure.
by. Daniel, I see your question. He asked, are you on commentary for Fiorentina Napoli? If so, do you think with the international break, do you expect some changes into the lineup? I'm
not on commentary for Fiorentina Napoli because unfortunately the same day it's Juventus against Inter. I say unfortunately, it's always nice to do a Derby d'Italia. I've actually missed that game before. I think it feels like it's happened 2 or 3 times in the last 3 or 4 years that those games have been on the same day. I would expect some changes. I just think he's going to go with whoever's healthiest. And, I've not seen what Matias Oliveira's up to, for instance, but I know that if players are coming back from South America, then typically they don't get back until that much later. Maybe they don't get back until the Thursday and then the game is on the Saturday. So it'd be unusual to see a player like that start. But I think he will try and mix it up. I think Højlund will get some minutes. I'd like to see... What I'd love to see is Napoli get a penalty and then give it to Luca. I know there was a big controversial moment with Luca last season whilst an Udinese play, him taking a penalty off Thauvin. But I feel like the sooner he scores his first Napoli goal, the more relaxed he's going to be, and then that will help everyone around him. But I can see some changes, but I think, again, where possible, he'll try and pick that 4-1-4-1 system that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I agree heavily with the Luca statement you just made. I believe, too, that once he gets his first goal, all those nerves and the pressure, he's got a lot on his shoulders right now with Lukaku being out 3 months. I think once he gets a nice little golazo, he'll start to make more of an impact and not show as many nerves on the field. So back to the UCL, Napoli Club Toronto asked, how well do you think Napoli can do in the Champions League? He predicted a minimum quarterfinal finish.
I don't know about a minimum quarterfinal finish. I can see Napoli making it into the knockout stages for sure. But then it becomes a bit of a toss of the coin. We saw that last season with Liverpool and Paris Saint-Germain. You can get unlucky with the draws in that playoff round. I think the best bet is to try and finish in the top 8. But I see no reason why once Napoli, if and when Napoli finish in the top 24 teams, you win that playoff, and then all of a sudden you're into the round of 16. I definitely think they can probably emulate what they achieved that season when it was a quarterfinal against Milan. I was there for that, and a little bit disappointing, obviously that game for a number of different reasons. But I think Conte wants to prove a point. I think this Napoli team are well equipped, and I actually think the current format is slightly more forgiving two Italian teams than the previous iteration of it. And we've seen, Inter got to 2 finals in the space of 3 years. Milan got to a semi-final. Napoli got to a quarter-final. I think Italian teams are starting to figure out in this modern era what is required to get there. And of course, it comes down to a lot of luck as well in terms of form and injuries going into the new year. Match day, I think, is the end of January. Then we'll have the playoff round quite soon after that. And then you're into the spring. But there's no reason to suggest that Conte, a coach as accomplished as him, cannot beat some of his rivals over 2 legs. And I think he really wants to prove that, because I think he's getting a little bit sick of this reputation of being only a league coach and not very good in the Champions League.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Conte's biggest flaw in Europe in general, apart from the domestic league, is his rotations. Like even in Serie A, he tends to do that. Like I would like to see Neres come on just a bit earlier. He's been coming on the 75th minute. Just too late of rotations. I feel like once he gets that settled, and he has the players to do it now, so I think we'll be okay. Semi-final, that is optimistic. I would be happy getting to the knockout rounds and then see from there where we stand. But it's great to hear that Napoli fans believe we can go in the quarterfinal, so that's fine. So Peter here asks, who do you think is the Napoli player that will have the biggest impact that nobody is really talking about?
That is a very good question. I need to give that a little bit of a thought. Well, obviously, there are some players we haven't seen yet, like Sam Berkema, who I really liked at Bologna. But I've been a huge Amir Rahmani fan ever since he signed for Napoli. I don't really understand the criticism he gets. So I think it's going to be hard for Berkema to get in, because I think Buongiorno hopefully is going to stay fitter this season, and is therefore going to be the preferred partner. So it's a new signing with the biggest impact. Okay, I think we're not really talking as much now about Lang, just because he's played very little in the first 2 games, a handful of minutes in the first 2 games. But I think he could be the player to have the impact. Maybe it's not going to be the impact that we expected in terms of coming straight in, the new Kvara. I interpreted it his unveiling in Di Matteo in July, and they said, "Are you ready to, pick up Kvara's legacy?" And he was like, "Sure, why not?" And he's very self-confident, which I like. But maybe he's not going to be one of the first names on the team sheet. Maybe it's not going to be Conte reverting to 4-3-3 and having Politano on the right and Lang on the left. But I think maybe he could be the impact sub, and therefore the impact he would make would be in terms of breaking open difficult, tight games late on and being the difference between a draw and a win. And maybe he does that a handful of times, and suddenly Napoli have got 10 more points in the season because Lang has provided 3 assists and scored 2 goals in tight games down the stretch.
Sure. So we did discuss about Lukaku and Rahmani kind of being injured. And I know Lukaku's out for 3 months. Rahmani could be up to 4 weeks. Obviously, you stated that Bukema might make a big impact. So we'll go ahead and skip that, because we kind of went over the Højlund situation as well with that. In terms of formations, what do you think the formation will be against? We have Fiorentina coming up. Do you think he'll stick to the same thing or kind of change it up a bit?
I think he's going to stick to the same formation, especially as Napoli are away as well, because I think it provides that balance in terms of it's a way of incorporating as many quality midfielders on the pitch at the same time. We all wondered a bit naively. We thought, okay, De Bruyne's coming in, they're going to sell Anguissa, or maybe if he stays, then he's going to be back up. And no, he's actually found a way of making sure that all 4 play: McTominay, Lobotka, De Bruyne, and Anguissa. So I think he's very unlikely to touch that. I think what might happen, Elmas is one of my favourites. I would love to see him make an impact, but that would be my heart rather than my head. I still think he can offer a lot, but I think I would love it if Elmas suddenly set the world on fire again. We'll see. He was brilliant at Torino for 6 months last season. So, but coming back to the previous point, I think it's going to be a case of 4-1-4-1, or at least the 4-4-1-1, whichever way you want to look at it. And I think what's going to happen is Conte is then going to turn to those more creative players if and when he needs them. So I don't see any change in formation unless we get several consecutive examples of Napoli really struggling to fit into that system. If suddenly he thinks that they're a better fit in a 4-3-3, or who knows, maybe even going back to a 3-5-2, then they might move away from that. But I think he's chosen this formation because he wants to get McTominay and De Bruyne on the pitch together. He wants them to alternate positions. And he knows that Lobotka provides balance and sets the tempo. And Anguissa is a fairly unique skill set in terms of Napoli's midfielders. So I think it's going to be the similar shape. Maybe there's a change or two, as you mentioned, with Rahmani's injury as well.
Yeah, you make great points. I don't think he would change it either, just for the simple fact that it's working as of now. It was frustrating last match when Kayedi put 8 stubborn defenders back there and kind of parked the bus on us. So until something happens to where he needs to really change the formation, like you said, add some more creativity, which is why I would like to see him implement Noah Lang and Neres a lot sooner into the match. So, if it's like that, then I think he would make some changes. So in terms of Serie A, yeah, go for it.
No, I'm just hoping that for Fiorentina they're not going to park the bus. I hope they're not going to look at that match and decide to approach it that way, because if they don't approach it that way with that midfield, we could score a lot of goals. But when you park the bus like that, it's hard for any team to score a lot of goals. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we need Luca or maybe Højlund, as Patrick mentioned, to get real clinical for us at the front. And in terms of Serie A, we'll get into the predictions. Top 6. What are you thinking, Patrick? I know it's early.
Yeah, I hate doing predictions because I always think you can only really get it wrong, to be honest. So I believe a lot in these. I wouldn't say it's superstition necessarily, but I believe a lot in trends. And having covered the league over the last few seasons, no team has successfully defended the league since 2019 and 2020. So the odds say that it's unlikely Napoli would be able to defend their title. That doesn't mean they can't, but I think people are being a little bit reductive in just saying it's Conte, he wins the league, Napoli have spent money, Inter have changed coaches. So by that notion, Napoli are definitely going to win the league. I don't think it's as simple as that. But equally, I think you also need to look at it from another angle. You say, okay, if Napoli don't win the league, which team are able to do so? Milan, probably not. Juventus, I'm not sure. So Inter. So again, if it comes down to a straight shootout between Conte and Kivu, I think all of us have got our money on Conte. But again, there's that variable there with, I know that I'm putting off answering the question about the first, by the way, this is classic broadcasting, by the way. I think because I'm on a Napoli podcast, I'm going to put Napoli at number 1. That's what you want to hear. That's the headline. Napoli are going to win the league 2025-26. But I think, honestly, then, you could literally throw them up and they would come down. I think the other 3 in the top 4 are probably going to be Inter, Juventus and Milan. I have Milan slightly ahead of Roma. I know Roma have started well, but I just think Milan, especially with bringing in some of the players that have done, Nkunku, Rabiot, I think they mean business. And we saw last season as well, if you're only playing 1 game a week, if you have a coach that knows how to manage that and prepare the team well, and I think Allegri can do that. I don't think he's as good at doing it as Conte, but I think he can certainly get Milan to 70, 75 points to be enough for the top 4. But it depends. I think we'll know a lot more come the October international break, when we've seen a few more games. If Napoli can go on the sort of run that they enjoyed under Spalletti in 2022-23, you remember, unbeaten until first week of January when they lost to Inter. I think it was the first 17 games unbeaten. If Napoli can do a stretch like that, then maybe they build up such a lead that no one can even get near them. But how easy that is to do with Champions League football remains to be seen. But you wanted 6, so let's say Napoli, Juventus, just because I would love the story of a Napoli-Juventus title race. I think that would be the most amazing story to cover. Inter, Milan, Roma. I'm not as big as on Como as everyone else is. So I've got Roma at 5th. Maybe even Lazio. Again, they've got no European football. It's a settled squad. Sarri knows what he's doing. Let's go with Lazio. There you go.
That's fair. Yeah, I had Como only at 6th or maybe 7th. I definitely agree with you. I'm not huge on them, but I am a little optimistic with their coach, their ownership. I feel like they have a lot of potential, but it's yet to be seen. So Daniel asked here, I know we already talked about formations, but he makes a good point with the goalie situation. Do you think we could potentially see a goalie rotation this weekend? huge debate among the Napoli fans.
I need to be careful what I say here because, outside of the booth, when I speak to colleagues and also some Napoli fans, I've never been a huge Alex Meret fan. I think, credit to him, he's won 2 league titles. You can't take that away from him. There are matches when he makes some great saves. I've been a huge Vanja Milinkovic-Savic fan for many years. I've taken some heat about that as well. But I just think he's got the feet of a midfielder, and he's 2 meters tall. And okay, he makes the odd mistake. But I think if you sign him, it's to play him sooner or later. I don't think he's going to be necessarily just the Champions League goalkeeper, because he's not played in that competition. And also, you only get 8 games minimum. Maybe you get 10 if Napoli make it through to the playoff. Maybe you get 12 if then they go through to the round of 16. But sooner or later, they're going to play Milinkovic-Savic. And I don't know when that moment is going to be. And all I would say is Meret actually has always performed better when he knows he's the guaranteed starter. We remember when David Ospina was there. That's when Meret's form was really up and down, because he didn't feel like he had the full backing of the club. So I do wonder about this. I think it's a bit of a hot potato. It's up to Conte to manage it. Or there comes a time when he brings Milinkovic-Savic in and then he remains. But I'm not really sure of the logic behind it, because they're the same age as well. They're both born in 1997. So they're both 28, feasibly got another 8 to 10 years. I'm not really sure what the thinking was, because we saw with Elia Caprile, who I think wasn't far off Meret's level. And he said, well, if I'm not going to play, I'll go elsewhere. So it's a curious one. I'm sure Manna has his reasons for it. But at the moment, I can't figure out what they are. But yeah, the problem, I guess, comes is if Meret is already playing well and hasn't made any mistakes, and he hasn't, 2 clean sheets and 2, if you pick Vanja and then he comes in and makes a mistake that costs Napoli points in Florence, then all of a sudden it's not a good look. So I have a feeling that Meret will continue in goal, but I can understand the curiosity of the fan base to want to see Milinkovic-Savic as soon as possible.
I agree. And I also think that if Meret was to make a huge mistake, then Conte would try to, implement VMS into the lineup. Until that happens, I don't see him starting. I could see him starting in like the Coppa games, just because, it's Coppa Italia. It's a good way to kind of implement players that don't get too much playing time. And I'm not sure when that starts, but in terms of right now, it will be Meret, like I said, until he makes a huge mistake. But let's get into the next question. So this one's kind of a hot topic. My dad would always mention this in the past. Napoli becoming a dynasty. Do you think if they were to win one more Scudetto or even make a huge impact in the UCL, does that make Napoli a dynasty?
It would do, yeah. If they won another Scudetto, that's 3 and 4 years. Even if they won another Scudetto next season, that's 3 and 5 years. I think that's definitely the conversation you'd have to have. Even a deep run in the Champions League. But I think, yeah, the dynasty conversation has to come from domestic dominance. And the history of Italian football tells us that, with the exception of Torino in the 1950s, before the Superga disaster, we didn't have a team outside of Inter, Milan and Juventus having those sort of dynastic runs. So it would be amazing to see it. The closest thing we've had was the turn of the new millennium when Lazio and Roma won consecutive Scudetti. The Scudetto stayed in the capital, but they're 2 rivals and two teams. Already, the fact that Napoli have won 2 in the space of 3 years shows that Italian football is changing. And it's testament to how well run the club has been under 2 decades under De Laurentiis, because it's just unheard of. The previous 2 that Napoli won, 2 in the space of 4 seasons, but with the greatest player arguably of all time, inspiring the team. All of a sudden now, you've gone two from the last 3 seasons with a terrible year in between. But let's not forget, I always remember the 21-22 season when Milan won the Scudetto. I always remember right up until match day 29, it was a 3-horse race. And I still remember that game when Napoli won away at Lazio to go top overnight. It was the week before that terrible goal from Giroud, the mishit Calabria shot. Giroud stabs it in, and Milan go and win in fuori rotta. But the week before, Insigne and score, and Napoli come from behind to win 2-1 away at Lazio. And it felt like they were going to go on and win the league that season. So in a parallel universe, there's even scope to say Napoli could have already won 3 from the last 4 years. If that Spalletti side goes on to get it done that year, in the end it was Milan. So I think there are the conditions for it to happen. I really like the signing of Højlund now, because I was thinking beyond Lukaku, even before the injury, I thought you need someone in place to be a long-term successor to Lukaku. And I think with Højlund and Luka now, there's definitely scope for them to pick up the slack. You couldn't expect one of them to do it on his own, and we've seen that with Luka in the first 2 matches. But now, if Luka knows that all of a sudden he's got internal competition from Højlund, he has to up his game. Højlund comes in, scores a few goals, that inspires Luka, and then before you know it, we get to January, and people almost forget that Lukaku's on the squad. Well, he's been left off the Champions League and the Serie A list. Suddenly, you then reincorporate him when you get the opportunity mid-season, and maybe his experience, goals, and above all assists, as we saw last year, allows you to go on and win the league again. And then we're suddenly talking about a Napoli team that have won 3 Scudetti in 4 years, and it would be historic.
And the thing with Højlund is he's a different type of striker. So at some point, Conte might even have the option to put 2 strikers up top. That's crazy.
I would love to see that. Yeah, I think Luka and Højlund, especially if it's a case of Luka flicking the ball on for Højlund, gambling in behind, no one's going to catch him. I think, and then if you bring in Vanya as well, and you can suddenly say, we've got a whole new string to our bow. We've got a goalkeeper that can ping it 80 yards perfectly onto a striker's head. He knocks it down. Højlund's in behind. And all of a sudden you can go direct that way. And when teams know that you can be that direct, then suddenly they have to drop off a bit more. You've got more space in the midfield, and players like McTominay and De Bruyne can shoot from distance. And yeah, I can only see good things from this group of players. It's up to Conte to figure out the right mix and get them all incorporated. But yeah, I think as a neutral, I don't remember being this excited about a Napoli team since Kvara and Osimhen, and obviously we knew that wasn't sustainable because both players were fairly outspoken their ambitions to play elsewhere, and we knew that from their agents. But in terms of the current group of players, De Bruyne's just signed, he's very excited. The rest of the core of that Scudetto winning team have all stayed. And you've got players like Di Lorenzo and Politano that I still think don't get enough praise. Politano, I think, is playing the best football of his career at the moment, despite not scoring, I think he got 3 goals last year, but he was so crucial to what Conte's team did. Sorry, I realized that was a long answer.
No, that's fine.
That's
We actually had someone mention that Politano might go down as one of the most underappreciated Napoli players ever, just because he does receive a lot of criticism and hate, as much as I don't like to say it, but it is a truth. Yeah, he does frustrate me at times, but you can't deny his hustle and his grit and just the impact that he makes just for the defense alone, running back and forth. I think that he's very underrated. Yes, I do have my criticism on him, especially whenever he, tries to do the little Insigne shot from outside the box, curling it in. He's not Insigne, but yeah, I mean, we all have a little criticism, so it's fine.
Would you guys have taken, we spoke about Elmas briefly, would you have taken Insigne back, or do you think that ship has sailed?
Nope, that ship has sailed for me.
Oh my God, no.
I know how my dad.
There's a reason. There's a reason he hasn't found a team yet.
I do feel a little bit bad for him. I mean, I feel worse for people like Mertens and Koulibaly, but part of me does think, it would have been nice for those guys to have won a Scudetto, Hamsik as well, those sort of guys winning a Scudetto, and it's the guys that have come after that have got it done. Keep Insigne out of Campania. There you go. We've been provocative. So.
Michele, man. Michele always has these takes in here. He's always got something to say that's going to get everybody fired up.
None. So a little side question here from Gianluca.
Sure.
Do you see Gutierrez becoming the big name LB in Serie A? Di Marco seems to be trending down and Theo is gone. I have high hopes for Miguel.
There's definitely a spot there. I think the reference to Di Marco trending down, yeah, he's more of a left wing back. We saw last night in the Italy game against Israel that as a left back, he's certainly got his deficiencies defensively. And Theo having obviously moved to Saudi. I have one rule that I try and keep, and it's I don't judge a player until I've watched them regularly, and typically I watch them regularly in Serie A. So I'm very curious to see what Gutierrez can offer. Again, it's one of those where I don't see him coming straight into the side, but yeah, I'm curious. I always think Napoli typically they either get signings very right or very wrong. And so for every Natin, there's a Kvaratskhelia, for instance. So or a Cayuste, So I'm hoping that Gutierrez falls into the more of the McTominay Kvaratskhelia category rather. So I'm curious to see what he can do. And if Napoli can, I like Matias Oliveira, but if Napoli can get a fullback who's really making things happen in an offensive sense as well, I think that just only goes to strengthen the team even further.
Thank you, Patrick. So we'll stray away from Napoli just for a second here because we would like to hear your predictions in the UCL for all of the Italian teams. Just in general,
sure. I don't think Inter will repeat going to the final. I think the goal, just like last season we saw Inter, Milan, Atalanta and Juventus, all 4 Italian teams got through the league phase in that none of them finished 25th and below. Obviously, we then saw those 3 teams, Juventus, Atalanta and Milan, all crashing out. I mean, 2 to Dutch teams, 1 to a Belgian team. It wasn't a great look. So I'm hoping that if the Italian teams are to go out, most of them in the playoff round this season, that at least it's against teams from superior leagues to Serie A in terms of wealth, be that the Premier League or on a similar level, maybe German sides or Spanish teams. So I expect at least one of them to go beyond the playoff stage. Last season, it was in to make it to the final. I think the final is probably a bit of a stretch, but you never know. I mean, the problem is you're relying on either beating teams like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Liverpool, Manchester City, Bayern Munich, or Paris Saint-Germain, or you're relying on 3 or 4 of those teams to have a bad season and to crash out. Noah Lang did help beat Juventus. They asked about that at his unveiling, actually. It was quite interesting. But I think quarterfinal has to be the goal for all 4 of the Italian teams. And then you see from there, if you get a good draw, if the enthusiasm's up. And I actually think the best chance you have of winning a Champions League, and we've seen that historically as well, a little bit with, we've seen it with Milan in the past, for instance. Often the best bet of winning the Champions League, unless we forget when Inter went to the final and lost to Manchester City, they were way off the pace in that Napoli Scudetto win. I think they ended up coming 4th. You almost need to be out of the running in the league, and you can be like, okay, we're safe enough where we're going to qualify for next season's Champions League, but we can go all in on the Champions League. We saw last season with Inter that if you try and stay competitive on all fronts, eventually you can come up short. So I think all 4 will finish in the top 24. I'm not willing to go out on a limb and say that more than one will get beyond the playoff stage. And I think that's just where we are in terms of Italian football. And I know that I'm saying that Atalanta, I don't think Atalanta are as bad as everyone makes out. I still think they've got a very good squad of players. Ivan Juric has a point to prove. He has everything to prove as well, because the last 2 jobs he's done have been very underwhelming. But I think in terms of the quality they have in the squad, especially if they can get Lookman back involved again, I think they can probably get enough points to finish in the top 24. But are we looking at an Italian winner of the Champions League in 2026? No.
That's fair.
To say yes as a huge Serie A fanboy and a cheerleader for the league. I can't intellectually, I can't say that.
No, that's definitely fair, Patrick. So in terms of ADL improving as an owner, for lack of better words, ever since Conte's arrival, he's almost seemed to, keep his mouth shut. We know how extravagant he can get on the mic and just in general. Where do you see him improving as an owner? We know that he's trying to build this new stadium. He just recently finished the contract to build the new training center. But how else could he improve?
I'm not sure how much more there is to improve, to be honest. I think he needs to be a little bit more controversial. I'd like to see him keep his counsel a bit more, as you said. Occasionally he can make some outlandish statements. He can be quite offensive, both to the league structure and the current balance of power, and insinuating that other clubs shouldn't be able to win things whilst being run on debt. The rules are in place. If Napoli wanted to exploit the situation with regards to debt and the rules there, they could do so. They choose a different route. They want to be a virtuous example of club, running in the black with a positive turnover. And that's certainly to his credit. Obviously, he comes up against Italian bureaucracy, which occasionally is exacerbated in southern Italy. So getting anywhere near building a training ground and acquiring a site for a training ground is going to be challenging process, a lengthy process. I know he tweeted that photo of the first, you know, him breaking. Well, they're not even breaking ground. La prima pietra, you know, as if it's some sort of, you know, St. Peter building bridges and all this sort of stuff. It was a little bit over the top. But, you know, I see what he's trying to say. He wants to move the club forward. He wants the club to be more sustainable. And obviously, you know, you need a place where you can house the academy and the first team, and they can train together. And suddenly, if you want to borrow a player from the academy to train with the first team, you can do so on any given day. They don't need to join up with the first team for the whole season. You know, I like what Conte's doing now with bringing in some of the other guys. You know, we saw Ambrosino, Vergara. We saw that a little bit in the first couple of weeks. But in terms of what ADL can do, I think he learned from that blip year. I think he was devastated to lose that run of however many seasons it was in a row with Napoli qualifying for Europe, something like 13 seasons in a row or something. So I think he's learnt that. We saw it with the hire of Manna, who I think is outstanding, by the way, despite being pretty inexperienced. I think that's an incredible pickup. And I think he's once again delegating to his senior management. And I think that can only be a good thing. I think, unfortunately, what happened with Spalletti clouded his judgment. Spalletti left. He then convinced himself that the third Scudetto, the first of the modern era, was much more to do with him than the entire cast. And so then, obviously, it's once you start to lose the best players, Kvaratskhelia or Seaman, the coach is gone, and then you bring in a pretty underwhelming replacement in Rudy Garcia. The players you sign aren't up to it. You get rejected by certain coaches. I think that was a real dark cloud, and that was a blip. But I think the best thing that he's done from that is learnt the lesson. And he seems to have gone in 180, the complete opposite direction, and said, okay, actually, I think what he probably thinks is, I'm not going to speak for him, obviously, but I imagine what he thinks is, if I've got a sporting director and we get the recruitment wrong, well, actually, then that person's in the firing line. Whereas if I'm doing the recruitment myself and I get it wrong, then the fans are going to turn on me. So there is someone who's expendable there, and you just give yourself a bit more separation from it. But I'm very impressed with the way he's run it, and I just love what Napoli do, to be fair, commercially with the kits. I like how, you know, some of the quirky locations they have for player unveilings and for shirt presentations and all that sort of stuff. It's and I love how they tap into the soul of the city, and they're really, I think they're doing a really good job as well. His daughter's doing a really good job with that wing of the business, to be honest. And he runs it like a business. He's got a pretty American view of it there. You know, we know that his family has that background in the film business. We know that it's a lot of he spends a lot of time in LA, which he loves telling us on social media. You know, so I think he's taken an American vision to a very Italian and more than Italian, a very Neapolitan institution.
Yeah, if there's one thing that ADL does exceptionally well, it's being a businessman. You know, in terms of finances, I think we could improve on marketing, but that's more in the aspect of, you know, sponsorships. We don't have a Nike or Adidas. It is EA7 with Armani. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that in terms of marketing we'll really level up until we get a sponsorship that's of that nature. You know, someone who's huge like that. But I do love the kits. As you mentioned, his daughter has done a phenomenal job with the design. These last 3 seasons, I mean, for me, I know I'm a little biased, but I feel like we've had some of the best kits in Europe these last 3 seasons. Like we're very consistent in that nature. So in terms of
hey Mario, let me mention one thing. I'm curious what Patrick thinks about this. So with the stadium, I think that we're at a point, at least personally, I feel like we're at a point where a new stadium is getting more real than it's ever been. Like I feel like it is something that we can feel more confident in, that's on the horizon. But one thing I'm wondering about is the amounts that have been announced of how much the stadium is going to cost, which I believe was 250 to 300 million. That seems to be a lot less than what I would imagine it to be. I wonder if that's because, like my son just said, Mario, the sponsorship part is separate from that. Like, is that what ADL is going to fund? And I can't imagine that it's enough. So maybe the sponsorship is what's going to really, really help get that stadium on its feet. What do you think about that, Patrick?
It's a difficult one. I think, obviously, for that money, you're not going to get a Tottenham Hotspur stadium, which is obviously best in class. You know, the problem is you have such a a big fan base, and we're seeing, with these consecutive sellouts, I think it's 11 or 12 in a row now, that you cannot, if you're going to build a new stadium, it cannot be anything under than 50, 55, 60,000 seats. The other model you can take, obviously, and I know it's a dirty word in these circles, is you go a Juventus stadium model, but that's 42,000 seats. And I think that, okay, you can drive up demand there and you create a waiting list, but I don't think that's really an approach that Napoli would take. You actually want to allow as many fans into the stadium as possible. So if you want, the issue is, if it's public money, then obviously you're in the same situation. At the moment, so many of these Italian clubs are hamstrung by the fact that they're renting facilities off the municipality. So I think you need private equity to fund the stadium, or you need to, I don't know if you can create a bond and therefore you sell off the debt and you fund it that way. I don't see De Laurentiis pouring a load of money into making a stadium. So I'm not a financial expert. I think you need to figure out whether there's a way of building a stadium on the same site, and then maybe you're able to keep playing there. And I know certain stadiums have been built around the existing facility, which eventually, when the new facility is ready, you then knock down the existing structure, whether it means going elsewhere. I think it's a shame. I think you need to stay in Fuorigrotta if possible. I know a number of other sites have been mooted and things, and obviously, but no, that's prime real estate. So in an ideal world, within the next 10 years, Napoli have a new stadium, and it means that they're able to increase revenue, but also you need to keep the ticket prices affordable. So it's always striking that balance between serving your fan base, which is the beating heart of the club, but also creating an experience for Napoli fans coming from elsewhere. There's a lot of football tourism in Italy in particular. I know loads of guys like you that go to Napoli games several times a season. So you need to make it a worthwhile experience there. And I know there's a lot of charm to the Maradona. And let's be honest, the stadium is even in a better place than it was until we had the university games a few years ago. It was terrible. At least now it's much more televisual. We have the beauty camera with the Napoli and the Azzurri seats across the way. But you still got the horrible moat. Yes, they've redone the press conference room. It's a bit better, but it's more than a lick of paint. You need a new facility. I just don't know how quickly and how feasibly you can do that without the city council really getting on board with it, but also saying, okay, we'll provide some funding towards it, but we don't expect to have any sort of stake in the future. I think you would almost need a local government or a regional grant to say, this is money from taxpayers, it's yours to build the stadium. It's a public interest project, as opposed to, because otherwise you're just back to square one. If the city council just builds another stadium and then lease it to you, you're never going to make much revenue from it. You have to make sure it's a private owned facility, and obviously there are pros and cons to that.
And the other thing with ADL being such a good businessman and his connections to a lot of American ventures is hopefully part of that can be a sponsorship. And it would be an amazing thing if we were able to get a huge sponsor from the States to help with the funding. So I'm hoping that his connections can make a difference in that aspect. We'll have to see.
Definitely. Yeah. The naming rights is a big thing. As soon as you're able to do that and the stadium goes by a different name, then all of a sudden it just injects a load of cash. I mean, we've seen that with Arsenal with the deal with Emirates Stadium over the last 20 years or so.
Thank you, Patrick. So in terms of the panel questions, we've reached our limit. So to close out the live stream, we'll just throw you a few more questions from the chat just because they've been exploding in here. So we'll start with Tutto Calcio podcast, a great podcast, by the way. If you guys don't know who they are, you should definitely check them out. Do you think Napoli is heading towards a Scudetto dynasty with the squad that they've built and with Conte at the helm?
I think we spoke about it earlier, didn't we? Said it could be possible. Mm-hmm. Whether they're heading towards it, ask me that again in March. I'm gonna bottle that question at the moment. And yeah,
we did discuss it earlier. Fair enough. And here we have Michele again. Speaking of Ambrosino and Vergara, who I am very high on, by the way, I love Vergara. What are your thoughts with those two and their future at Napoli?
I think already it's great to see them getting minutes. I think Conte's come out and said that they're both going to be part of the club's plans going forward, and it's nice to see these players in the first team squad. Napoli don't necessarily have the best record of bringing through young players from the academy. Again, I'm going to defer to the answer I said before. like when I was mentioning about Gutierrez, I'd like to see more of these players for a sustained period and then really judge them based on that. Because occasionally you get these players that look amazing and they do something really special, and then you wonder whether they can sustain it. And I go back to the final game of last season, Bologna against Genoa. This kid Venturino for the under-21s, he scored twice that day, and he looked absolutely incredible. And I'm waiting to see whether he can kick on. So, look, if Conte wants them in and around the Napoli first team, there's a reason, and he clearly rates them. And so, I'd like to see more of them, and hopefully, big things to come.
So Peter asked this question. This is really heavily in terms of marketing. Thoughts on Serie A playing league games in the States?
I'm not averse to the idea. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of publicity at the moment surrounding the game in Perth, Western Australia, early next year between Milan and Como. So I think it's a case of if that precedent's set, why not? You know, it's a global game, it's a global league. I get so much interaction from fans of Italian football from all over the globe, particularly in the United States. So I think why not take the game to that part of the world? I think you need to be very clear. You need to have it approved in the Assemblée, you know, the general meeting between the clubs, to make sure they all sign off on it. And you need to make sure that the club that's the home team for that day, designated home team, is willing to waive a home game. And if they lose that game or they don't win it, then they just need to hold their hands up and say, okay, this is it in the interest of the greater good, the long-term growth of the league. But I mean, yeah, I think it would be incredible to have a Serie A game played. You know, it's one thing a preseason friendly. It's one thing a Club World Cup game. But I think having a league game over there would just be amazing.
Oh, Patrick, imagine a game like Napoli-Juve at MetLife Stadium in New York City. Oh my God, that would be awesome.
There you go.
About that. I don't think the local fans will be too happy with it, but you know, in terms of advertising Serie A, I think that would be huge. I know there's a lot of people that are against playing in the United States, but I think we should have a couple games out here. That's just me, not just because I actually live out here and want to go see them, but it's just huge in terms of advertising. So Patrick, we'll throw you one more question here from Daniel. Patrick, I know you're a huge Berardi fan. Who are some of your favorite players to watch in the league?
I'm a huge Berardi fan. Thank you for mentioning him. I was always hoping that Napoli would sign him. That would have been great to have commented. To be fair, I'd like to have seen him at any big club, but I'm so impressed with Berardi. And people forget how many goals he scored. More than 120 goals in Serie A, playing on the right wing for Sassuolo. I'm a massive fan of Giovanni Di Lorenzo, who I call the Tuscan Cafu. I know he's got his critics, especially in the national team. Who else? Ciro Immobile has always been a big favourite of mine, someone scoring that consistently. I really liked Alessio Cerci for a time, but he didn't last very long. So these are the sort of players I've enjoyed watching down the years. Lautaro Martinez, it's a fairly sort of obvious answer. Kvaratskhelia I've mentioned as well. But McTominay made my job so much fun last season. So much fun. It was like the big moments were sort of magnetized by him. You just knew that anytime something big was going to happen, he was going to be involved. And it was all that anticipation it created. But I think, the two that really have a place in my heart. In fact, hang on, I'm just going to. Here you go. I've got my two little pastori up here. One is Kvicha Kvaratskhelia, and the other one is Mimmo Berardi. So, and I've got one of the Queen as well. God rest her soul, as a good Englishman. But there you go. I'll finish on that note by saying that, it's that was the only downer on the Sassuolo 0 and Napoli 2 on match day 1. I was quite hoping that Berardi would score a goal, but he didn't.
Well, I'm glad he did it. Olivera actually somehow managed to keep him pretty quiet all game, which I was very impressed with, because we know that Berardi is no easy feat. So guys, thank you for tuning in to Napoli Nation TV. This is episode 8. Once again, thank you again, Patrick, for coming on this show. I know we've held you here for about an hour almost, so we appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Before we do end the stream, I do want to shout out this clothing brand, because two of my good friends, Matteo and Francesco, make this brand. It's called Calciotrici. You guys can barely see. I should probably get up a little bit, but they make very high quality clothing. I recommend checking them out. In the description, in the comment section, I'll leave their links. And any closing statements, fellas?
Patrick, I just wanted to say thank you too. You're living the dream. I remember when I was growing up as a teenager, and one of my things that I always thought that I would enjoy doing was commentating on games. So it's great to have you on the show, and your tactical analysis that you gave us during the show was amazing. Your ball knowledge is top notch.
Top
Thank
tier.
you very much.
My pleasure, gents. I'm, like I said, very impressed with the setup. Very professional podcast. And yeah, I love the passion. And thank you, everyone, for the questions. And yeah, we'll see what happens and see how badly my predictions go. But yeah, you never know. I'm sure we'll check back in future. And Forza Vania, there you go. Sign off with that.
Now, hold on. We can try this, Mario.
Oh Lord,
We weren't able to do it with our
Well, actually, no.
last
Patrick
live.
might do it. I knew Marco wouldn't do it, but I think Patrick will do it.
Can we get it from you, Patrick? Let's see. Go ahead, Mario.
Forza
Napoli.
No, an FNS, I can't do that. No.
I told you. We're never going to get anybody to say it.
We tried. We had somebody that'll do it.
I have my mother-in-law does that. You know, every time I speak to her on the phone, she'll often sign off with that. But there you go. She'll
Thank
say
you,
Forza
Patrick. We
Napoli,
really
and I
appreciate
have to resist saying sempre, which I know is obviously how you end it. But yeah,
Say Forza calcio. That's fair.
there you go.
we go.
Exactly. Long
There you
live
go.
Italian football. Exactly.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Bravo.
All right. Thank you to the chat. Thank you once again, Patrick. We appreciate your time. And everybody, have a beautiful day.
Ciao. Why you?
Ciao.